Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, analysing the events of the past 7 days with context and clarity alongside an ever-changing panel of distinguished international correspondents. In a week that's seen a changing of the guard in the UK with the resignation of the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the return to Westminster of the man set to take over, Andy Burnham. Within hours of Starmer's sombre and emotional departure speech, the new kid on the block was receiving a hero's welcome from his party on arrival, notably including several of Starmer's cabinet and loyalists, suddenly all smiles for selfies. A visible transference of power, and before the job is officially his, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch mocked the move, asking why they'd so quickly abandoned Starmer for, quote, a pair of eyelashes and a black t-shirt. It's dark blue, he replied. All this in a week that's marked 10 years since the UK voted to leave the EU. We'll be discussing Brexit, Britain and Burnham.
It's not the side.
It's a week where opening talks began to find a lasting peace between the US and Iran, though Trump cautioned from afar that he could strike again and Tehran threatened to pull its negotiators from the Swiss resort. Much was made whether J.D. Vance was outwitted in the optics war, with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi refusing a handshake and joint photo op, as America's Veep looked on, registering the moment. Talk 2 of why Qatar's PM did the same. J.D. Vance said the Iranian negotiators were, quote, extremely confusing, but emphasised, quote, substantive talks. Both presented a contrasting picture of what they'd achieved, but tankers are now leaving the Strait of Hormuz, but mines remain, and the world oil prices have dropped.
And we're doing very well in terms of negotiating a fair and reasonable deal. If Iran doesn't live up to their agreement, or if they're not behaving, I will do what I have to do.
It's been a week that's seen the most powerful earthquakes in Venezuela since 1900, the main shock registering 7.5 on the Richter scale. Hundreds have died. Authorities predict it will reach into the thousands after 2 back-to-back quakes. The capital, Caracas, and the coast of La Guaira were the worst hit. Rescue operations are ongoing.
Horrible. We've seen way too much. We fought to get the kids out alive. We got 1 out alive, thank God, but they were 3. We could not save all of them.
It's been a week in Europe of a heat wave that's hit record highs. More than 380 million people experiencing over 30 degrees in the hottest day ever in June recorded in the UK and Belgium. In Spain, the mercury passing 45 degrees. And the scorching days and tropical nights caused a political storm in France over the right to air conditioning, known as la clim. With only 25% of properties having air conditioners, far-right leader Marine Le Pen wants la clim for all. The far-left leader is pushing back, calling it a false solution that makes the environment worse. The Greens, the long-standing air conditioning opponents, have wavered. The leader, Marine Tondelier, saying there are places that just cannot do without it, including schools and hospitals.
Air conditioning, which wasn't really needed a few years ago, is becoming essential, but it won't solve everything. When temperatures reach 45 or even 50 degrees Celsius, as they may in France within a few decades, you can't just go about wearing a portable air conditioner around your neck.
And it's been a week where astronomers have discovered 2 exoplanets the size of Jupiter and lighter than candy floss. Researchers say the 2 super puff planets orbit stars more than 1,000 light years away and resemble shaving foam in their density. Well, with those airy thoughts in mind, I can promise you this won't be a panel of hot air tonight. Let's meet them. In the studio with me, Doug Herbert, France 24's resident international affairs commentator. Good evening, Doug.
Good evening, Gavin.
Doug's career began reporting on the Soviet Union from Moscow in the 1990s for the New York Times, then on to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and a career that's taken him to CNN, covering business and markets in the Big Apple and EU from London. Doug, tell me about your week and, well, you must have been melting in Paris. What is Herbert's guide to the heatwave?
Okay, I'm embarrassed to say this. It's the confessional, right?
Tell me.
I did something very un-French, or actually it's becoming more and more French. I got an air conditioner. It's not supposed to happen. You know, listen, I grew up native New Yorker, right? I grew up basically sleeping in permafrost rooms, right? Deep freeze. Even you guys in the UK, you know, you wouldn't have understood it. But, you know, I was the type of person I loved on a hot day when it's, 40 degrees out, getting into such a cold room that you need to draw a winter blanket over yourself. I was the most environmentally unconscious person you could ever find. Obviously, I've been in Europe for the past quarter century, and I got religion when it comes to climate. And I wouldn't have, banished the thought of air conditioning. I became the window opener, They're lowering your curtains. You sit in, cave-life darkness through the day and all that. I succumbed, my wife and I, let's put it that way. We both succumbed to the fact that, one of the nights this week, actually 2 in a row, were 29 and 30 degrees Celsius. At night, we were sweltering and sweating. We had gotten, I think, one of the last air conditioner units about 6-7 days before. It came last night. It weighed about 40 kilos. I almost broke my back hauling it up the stairs. Plugged it in, Gavin, for the first time last night. It was a guilty pleasure. But could I just say, beyond the glib jokes, forget me aside. Yeah, I got my portable air conditioner, right? One of those when you put the hose out the window. It really is something. It's not a solution for climate change, but, for people, and I think France is waking up to this, for people who need it for, health concerns, older people, pregnant women, even, people with conditions, medical conditions. It's not simply a matter of, you're environmentally unaware and ecologically insensitive. Air conditioning can be something that, if not a lifesaver, can really help people to cope with what is going to become the new normal. And the French mentality is changing. Mine changed long
it is.
ago.
You won't be the only one. It's sneakily queuing. And the Greens, perhaps of old, are thinking about actually there's got to be a solution for that AC. And to that point, I think emergency services in Paris saying they've dealt with something like 4 times the number of heart attacks, and not just old people, young people as well. Something else you've been covering this week, you've been covering for months actually, which is Venezuela. A quick word on that, because this is ongoing. We're still seeing developments of the scale of this event in Venezuela, the 2 earthquakes. One thing that strikes me, President Trump, after the capture of Nicolas Maduro back in January, talked about, we're kind of in charge now.
Yeah.
Does that give a responsibility to the US? So that's another focus of what happens next, isn't it?
Yeah, and you want to hear a paradox here? Since the U.S. actually, already was a big aid giver in many years past to Venezuela, it actually upped its aid after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, about $122 million in humanitarian aid, making it the top humanitarian aid giver in the region, which is counterintuitive, right? You sort of think that, this is Venezuela, the U.S. They hadn't been getting on too famously. Yes, now Trump has a friendly regime installed in that country. However, what's interesting here is, like I said, going back, there was a long tradition, with the U.S. helping Venezuela. I think there was a giant earthquake in 1812, which raised Caracas. And then I think James Madison administration, I raised my eyebrows too. Where'd that come from? They sent a lot of aid over there. So that's going back over 200 years. There's a long tradition. But it's a question that a lot of people are probably obviously asking tonight, right? Since Donald Trump sort of unilaterally dismantled the U.S. humanitarian relief program, USAID, which also did a lot of other things around the world for foreign relief and assistance, is the U.S. still up to the task of delivering this basic, fundamental, necessary, life-saving aid in regions when you have these man-made, these natural disasters, such as an earthquake? And the answer is it's complicated. What we do know is that so far the basic things, the State Department now has purview over the types of disaster relief that USAID would have done in the past. And they are right now, they have issued an order to the State Department to get, the disaster relief to that region as quickly as possible, because unfortunately the death toll is expected to climb quite drastically as they continue to find people under the rubble and people missing as well.
Doug, great to have you with us tonight. These are live images from Caracas. As I say, this story is expanding. More details are still coming in. Let's move to London. Let's give a warm welcome to Tom Newton-Don back to the programme. Good evening to you, Tom.
Good evening, Gavin.
Tom is writer, broadcaster, political commentator for The Times, formerly defence correspondent and political editor for The Sun, and now co-presenter of the fantastic podcast for The Times, The General and The Journalist. Let me ask you, Tom, one thing that strikes me, you've taken this podcast on the road this week. You've been asking the question, is Britain ready for a dangerous world? Was there a core conclusion? Was there a blunt answer or stiff upper lip?
We tried a bit of stiff upper lip, Gavin. We're still trying it in 35 degrees centigrade in London, and it was lovely listening to you two in what I can imagine was a beautifully air-conditioned studio in my house in London, which is, yes, I thought it might be. Anyway, we're still sweating it out over here. Problem with us Brits is that we're not used to heat. We love it on holiday, but We're not used to it here. So our daily lives, our working lives just collapse. Our trains stop working. Everybody gets road rage and starts fighting each other on London streets. It's sort of chaos, really. We did go on the road for the podcast, though. Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words. Just for the heat wave broke, I'm pleased to say. And the conclusion, guess what, was unanimously, no, we're not ready for any form of confrontation with a power such as Russia, such as China. Unlike, it has to be said, quite a few other European countries who have heeded the warnings of Russia's full-blown invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and others, and are rearming at an incredible pace, like Germany, like Poland, like the Baltics. Here in Britain, we're still busy resigning en masse of your defence secretaries because you can't agree a budget for the MOD. And by the way, the row over this resignation a couple of weeks ago of our defence secretary, John Healey, it was about a budget that wasn't even come close to what we actually needed to hit our NATO targets. We've all signed up to 3.5% of GDP by 2035. So we're still, I'm afraid, a myriad away from in my view, and the podcast view, General Sir Patrick's view, are getting it, sadly.
We will come to, we will no doubt be touching upon that during our Brexit, Britain and Burnham coming up. But let me ask you one thing. When you're at the festival, this is the Neville Holt Culture Festival, what is the most common question you're getting time and time again from the audience?
You know, the thing that always comes up is really interesting when we talk about, the threat growing, the reasons we need to rearm. People always say, yeah, OK, we get Russia's scary, we get what they're doing in Ukraine, but are they really a threat to the UK? I mean, we're a long way away from the Ukraine. Their missiles surely aren't going to be targeting us anytime soon. So where's the fire, I guess, is the most common question. And it's true. I don't think we will see Russian caliber cruise missiles smashing into London anytime soon. And they're not planning on doing that. But it doesn't happen like that. It happens via an alliance. So Russia, we know, is a very hostile country to the West, becoming ever more so. And the more it loses in Ukraine, and some, your fascinating reporting just now on the drone strikes again on Russia, showing real air defense vulnerabilities there. That the more under threat and under pressure it is on losing the Ukraine war, the more it might lash out elsewhere. Estonia, Latvia, the Baltics, the High North, Svalbard up in Finland, all potentially at risk, to test NATO, to test NATO's mettle, to see if the alliance is up to much, and to score a propaganda victory, back home in Moscow and St. Petersburg and the like. And that's when we'll get pulled in, because under Article 5, as you know, NATO countries have to respond when someone gets attacked. And you can actually get into a hot war with Russia remarkably quickly. So for us, for me, for Patrick, absolutely, the threat is there of a real live war with Russia. And yeah, potentially quite soon.
It's a very good point, and it can start off, as you say, testing very small. It's a couple of weeks ago, a British couple on a yacht suddenly find they've been shot at in the Channel and have to move very quickly. They were too close, say, to the Russians, but it's a very good point, well made. Tom, great to have you with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. Let's complete the lineup. Let's go from London. Let's go to Istanbul. Let's bring in Yeganeh Torbati, Iran correspondent for the New York Times and co-author of Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. Good evening, Yeganeh. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Yeganeh is also part of the Reuters team in the past that uncovered the financial empire controlled by the then Ayatollah Khamenei in 2013, a series that won the Gerald Loeb Award, the Overseas Press Club Award and the European Press Prize. Yeganeh, we're looking at your work here, your latest book, co-authored Stolen Revolution. This is years in the making, with considerable risk and trust building to tell this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your kind words. We really, my co-author and I, wanted to tell kind of a new story of Iran, not just sort of focusing on the politics and the ideology, which are, of course, important, but also the economic considerations that kind of keep the regime going, but have also contributed quite a lot to discontent within the country, as well as, trying to highlight the lives of ordinary people and how they have been living under this revolutionary state for the last 47 years.
I'm looking forward to your insight tonight. Thank you, Yeganeh. It's a fantastic read as well. Let's get started. We begin in the UK with an anniversary at 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, marking 10 years to the day that the British voted for Brexit by 52 to 48%. Organised celebrations or commemorations marking the momentous moment, there were none. What you could see was one of Brexit's most influential advocates and architects, Nigel Farage, doing a round of interviews on a day he wants reclassifying as UK Independence Day. Now, the National Bank holiday is also what he said he wanted, to re-celebrate the reclamation of sovereignty, he said. But he faced the same question on each programme, and that was, what's he done with the £5 million given to him as a Brexit grift from a crypto billionaire, which he also said was for his protection and is being scrutinised by the Parliamentary Commission for Standards.
So, Mr Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
Look, it's literally none of your business. If I've given it to charity, but the truth is, I haven't. I know what it's there
You haven't
for.
spent any of it?
It's none of your business.
Well, Nigel Farage, please, what has happened to this £5 million gift?
With all due respect, what's it got to do with you?
And you've spent none of it yet. But there's a £5 million nest egg to pay for your security until you die.
This was given to him as a gift. It's unconditional. I can do with it as I wish, right? I can spend it on cars if I wish, but I'm not going to. There's a very specific purpose.
On the same day, various economic analysis was deciphering the overall economic impact of Brexit to the nation rather than the individual. 10 years on, Bloomberg published an overall analysis that said Brexit may have caused a drop in the UK GDP by between 2 to 4%, equivalent to about £30 billion, $35 billion a year in lost revenue. The British government's own estimate from the Office of Budgetary Responsibility puts it at 4% of lost GDP revenue a year. And the National Bureau of Economic Research doubles that figure, putting it as much as 8% loss in GDP. And this week has raised economic debate on one side and the point of sovereignty on the other. Take back control, the slogan back then of when Brexiteers spoke of sunlit uplands. But more recent documentary evidence tells of another key campaigner. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson didn't actually believe people would vote for it. Before the referendum, he told David Cameron, quote, Brexit would be crushed like a toad under the harrow. A toad under the harrow is a phrase from Rudyard Kipling's Paget MP, a satirical poem that mocks the ignorance of the butterfly-like British politicians on the realities of the situation on the ground, evoking the suffering of the toad in the field as it's ploughed, painfully aware as the harrow rolls over him and helpless to it. The quote, the toad beneath the harrow knows exactly where each tooth point goes. The butterfly upon the road preaches contentment to that toad. And widening that analogy to the political carousel since the Brexit vote, there hasn't been a strong or stable government in 10 years, but 6 prime ministers and a 7th already incoming. Tom, Britain 10 years after Brexit, sunlit uplands or a toad in the harrow?
Can I say, Gavin, that was beautiful. Nothing like a bit of poetry on a Friday evening. Thank you for that.
I'll take it.
Well, it's neither, really, to be honest. Brexit is one of those things. It was actually fascinating. Actually, there was the 10th anniversary of this momentous moment, the biggest decision the British people have taken in, nigh on a century, really, for its political future. And it was another day, actually, really only marked by Nigel Farage getting a bit cranky on a load of broadcast interviews about what he's done with that £5 million. I mean, saying he can spend it on cars if he wanted to, but he's not going to tell us how he is spending it. May not be PR 101, how to get yourself out of a tight spot, but there we go. It's almost like the thing we don't really like to talk about anymore. So thanks for bringing it up. I think the nation was so fed up by the debate 10 years ago, and then for about subsequent 5 years onwards, after 2016, as we tried to work out how to get Brexit to work, how it would work, and then we did finally Brexit in, when was it, January 2020, that the nation really just don't want to hear it. If you look at the polls, people think it was the wrong decision. Comfortably now by about 65% to 35%. But if you ask them, well, do you want to reverse it and go back in? They also say no. They basically don't want to hear it. So perhaps we are now just ploughing on with, as you say, just trying to get on with a bit of a stiff upper lip. Because I think the divisions it caused were so deep. And they're beginning to heal a little bit. But, there is the economic damage you've just talked about, and the numbers are difficult to dispute, I think. There wasn't the short-term recessions or the immediate recessions that the Treasury and the likes of David Cameron predicting at the time of the referendum, those who argued to stay in. But overall, undoubtedly, the UK economy has taken a hit. It's very hard to see how it couldn't have with all the trade barriers and the extra red tape you have to pay. But there's also a political hit that the country has taken, what I think is really important, actually, which is why the likes of Nigel Farage, when he's not ranting about his £5 million, is still top of the polls. He's still very popular, where he wasn't 5 years ago. And that's the feeling of betrayal amongst the electorate, especially those who voted for Brexit. They voted for Brexit for prosperity, to get their factories back, to cut immigration. The likes of Boris Johnson were offering them, and that none of that has happened. It just manifestly haven't. Immigration has gone through the roof in Britain over the last really 5 years under Boris Johnson's government, because he wanted actually more migrants to come in to boost the economy, because the economy was struggling a bit post-Brexit. So they are very angry and fed up with politicians promising them everything, whether it's Brexit, whether it's something else. And I think that's why we've had that instability. That's why we're just about to get our 7th Prime Minister in 10 years, simply because our politics is just really broken. Politicians saying one thing, promising the world, being completely unable to deliver it. And really, as that cycle of misery goes on, they become ever more worried about speaking the truth to the people, and therefore they continue to promise silly things, and again it gets sort of worse and worse, really.
And to that point on immigration that you mentioned, Tom, the net migration, let's have a look at some of the figures. So at the time of Brexit, back in 2016, the estimated net migration was around 333,000. The commitment, as you know, back then was to cut immigration to tens of thousands. By 2023, you mentioned the Boris government, into the Rishi Sunak government, there was more than 1 million non-EU citizens entered the country. That was a net migration of 944,000. That's according to the Office for National Statistics. Under Keir Starmer, the figure for last year, net migration of 171,000. And the ONS say it's down to a number of reasons, combination of policies introduced by the previous government, Labour's policies, and the broader post-pandemic migration trends. Now, you will know, it's very interesting. It's a bit like the old Fawlty Towers sketch, Tom. You know, don't mention the war. It's become don't mention Brexit. It's a palpable thing. And you know, as many people do, the detail that you had to go through, the exhaustion level of it, because I stood behind you many a time at the Justice Lipsis building in Brussels as we queued for accreditation. You lived this story. So it must be also personal to you.
Yeah, it is. And we really did try to get in the weeds when we were all political journalists going out to these negotiations, and also negotiations going on in the UK. The biggest ones, quite frankly, weren't between the EU and Theresa May or Boris Johnson. They were between different factions of the Conservative Party, the governing party, of what type of Brexit they wanted. And I think the biggest problem with Brexit, and you know, it traumatizes me even to speak about it, Gavin. Thanks for triggering my PTSD on all that. But the biggest problem was it wasn't defined before it happened, before the vote, before it happened in 2020. No one actually had a plan for it. And I think that was because Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, the two biggest proponents of it, thought they had no chance of winning. So, you know, what's the point in doing long theses on how it actually worked? And when it happened, then no one could agree on what it should be. Should it be maximum deregulation, the maximum ability to move away from European standards to a sort of a Singapore on sea, a Singapore on the Thames sort of experience? Or do we still remain quite closely aligned to the mainland, to Europe? And where we've been left with is really nothing. We've moved away on some things, but we've kept a lot of common standard on others. So we don't get the benefits of Brexit. Some argue there are some, although I may not be one of them. And we don't get the benefits of membership either, because we're obviously not. We have tariffs and the like. So we're really in the worst of both worlds. And Gavin, there was a wonderful pro-EU march that was unsuccessful because there was no second referendum to overturn this. But in a very British way, you'll enjoy this, hopefully, that my favourite placard, this is 2 or 3 years ago now, my favourite placard read with someone wearing an EU T-shirt and the yellow stripes on a little beret, or the yellow stars rather, and their placard read, "Let's offer them tea, say we're awfully sorry, and never speak of it again." Which I think is sort of where most of us are now in the country.
Yes. And I must say as well, if you're listening later on the podcast version, you listen back. Did Gavin say a Brexit grift to Nigel Farage at 5 million? I said Brexit gift, so just to clarify that in case Mr Farage's team are listening as well. Doug, to Tom's point, very interesting week for Keir Starmer. He's been making popcorn at a cinema in Milton Keynes, living his best life outside of politics, the metaphorical gif of watching, well, the world this week collapsing, watching his downfall. What have you made of that?
Well, you know, Keir Starmer, sort of not an accidental politician, because obviously he was in the opposition for a long time. He had been obviously gunning for the prime ministership. But in a sense that when he did sweep in that landslide victory, it wasn't because of this overwhelming enthusiasm for the Labour Party, right? It wasn't a pro-Keir Starmer vote. It was a really visceral anti-Tory vote at the time. Rishi Sunak and all of that, get them out of there. They're the wellspring of resentment and anger against what was perceived as a failed Tory policy for an embattled Britain is really what swept Keir Starmer into power. Coming into office, he was already, something he never really was known for charisma. I see the pictures there. The serving popcorn. He's pretty good at that, isn't he? He was never really known as a charismatic type, but he really is in the wrong age at the wrong time, in a sense. His failings are he's generally a decent person. Forget what you think about his politics and his ideological stances. He's a decent person. He doesn't really play the brute power card, which is, the way to go if you're a politician in this age who wants to get the masses behind you. And he doesn't play that type of, I have the cards politics. I think he came in with, a fair share of true integrity, with a lot of ambition, wanting to get things done. And I guess it's regardless of what you think of him, the spectacle of his downfall is a little sad in the sense that I think he honestly believed that he could fight it out until the end. And I think it is, kudos to him in a sense that, and I can name a lot of politicians that would not have done this, but then when he was, basically read his marching orders and his own cabinet, his own party members, went to him and said, Mr. Prime Minister, you just do not have the votes in Parliament. You cannot sustain this. You cannot withstand. You cannot stay in power. Yeah. He accepted it with grace and dignity. I know that sounds a little bit, trite and cliched to say he bowed out with dignity, but that's becoming a rarer occurrence in this day and age. And I can, no shortage of politicians who, given the exact same set of circumstances, would have done so. And you could, you go back to in the U.S., right, from my early experience, Richard Nixon and Watergate, right? This was a man who, I'm not a crook, right? He was a crook, right? Watergate and everything else. And yet, when the leaders of the Republican Party went to the White House, I think it was a Sunday morning, and said, Mr. President, we can no longer support you. You do not have the votes in Congress. You will be convicted. He resigned. He resigned. And so I'm not saying Keir Starmer is not Richard Nixon, so let's not connect those dots. But I am saying that it is to his credit that under the pressure, he did see the light, even if cynics will say, well, he had no choice. He was forced out. Yes, but he did it in a graceful way, a dignified way. And I think he looked like he's enjoying the popcorn surfing there in that.
Yes, there wasn't a single event. Perhaps we can look through a few issues for Keir Starmer, the welfare debacle, the Mandelson mistake, and others, but it wasn't like Partygate. I think The Economist this week.
Can I just say one thing? His record in and of itself, he himself listed his achievements. You could say, of course, he's going to list his achievements. But, there was a meme going around this week, literally of 100 things he's done for Britain, from the health service to education to childcare to the list goes on and on. Factually corroborated programs and things. It reminded me of Biden. No one, he had a bad comms team, Starmer. No one.
Yes, that's a comparison you also don't want to get into.
Right, you don't want to get into, but you could say a record they weren't able to sell and they weren't able to communicate, and that is very important in this day and age.
Yes, and a number of errors within the government. The Economist said it like this week, I think. The government wilted like a hot plant in a heat wave, and eventually in comes Andy Burnham. To that point, Yeganeh, the long view on this. Andy Burnham comes in, the man that's, well, with the eyelashes and the black T-shirt is how Kemi Badenoch describes him. What are you making of the changing of the guard?
I think I should only probably be speaking about Iranian politics. There's so much going on in the Strait of Hormuz and everything. I have not been able to keep up on UK politics, and I don't think I'd be able to comment on that.
That is a very fair point. We will go to Iran very shortly. Just on that point, Tom, I'll throw that one to you instead. That the man, as The Economist pointed out, who's very identifiable in his look, is he identifiable in his policies?
No. And guess what? He's got rid of the black T-shirt, or dark blue T-shirt, as we should call it. We're all fascinated to see what he'd actually wear when he came down to swear in the House of Commons. He was a Labour cabinet minister under the last government. I was a political journalist at the time. I remember dealing with him. He was the health secretary, wore a suit, white shirt, dark tie, dark suit, normal politician's clobber. Went up to Manchester, ditched the white shirts, got the black T-shirts and the blue blazers. So we all thought, what's he going to wear when he swears in? And there, back with him, was that same white shirt, same sober tie. So, he can do mainstream politics after all. And that's look, you can't put too much in someone's clothing, but, you can in his first sort of few appointments. And there's a few things he's done already that I think are going to surprise a few people. My bet is he is not going to be the left-wing firebrand that he makes himself out to be. He has basically been everything. On Labour's journey, when Blair was around, he was a Blairite. When Brown was around, Prime Minister, he was a Brownite. Then he was a Corbynite. Then he was a Starmerite. So I think he may well end up doing what a lot of Labours do. They campaign on the left to get the votes of their members, who are generally more left-wing, and then end up governing somewhere near the centre, which is where the country on the whole is. So I suspect he may actually be, because he's the most incredible political pragmatist. He'll wear any clothes he can if the weather is right, and he's been proved to do that in the last sort of decade. I suspect he may surprise quite a few people, which means Ed Miliband probably won't be his chancellor, and I'll only 10 quid if he is by July. But I suspect he's going to surprise quite a few of us.
We know that his dad is a British telecom engineer, of course. Do you remember what Keir Starmer's dad did, Doug? Tom will tell you. What did he do, Tom?
Engineer?
He told
He's
us
a tool maker.
He's a tool maker. We were told a number of times. A very quick point to wrap up Brexit where we are. One of the benefits to Brexit, I'm told two things. Colonies of puffins off the coast of Scotland have increased because the Danes are not free to fish as many salt eels in the waters. But a bigger issue, AI, springs to mind. The UK, the argument is it's choosing its own regulation and it's outdoing much of Europe. Is that a point that's valid, Tom?
Yeah, I think it is really, to be honest. You sort of need to look where we are now and, the heat. But all of our economies, really, you look at the Brexit debate as well. It's difficult to actually know how much Brexit hurt the UK because COVID came along immediately. And a lot of other European economies have suffered as well. But you now look where we are. All of our countries are sclerotic. All of our countries are suffering. No one's got growth more than about 1% or even 0.5%, compared to the emerging world. China's, the Far East and America still growing comfortably. We've all got similar problems with the same sort of regulations that just simply aren't working. And guess what? Our politics isn't working as a result. And that's why you have the right, the extremes, the hard right and the hard left resurgent and very popular everywhere. We've got big problems in Europe, I think, and they come down to issues precisely like those.
Tom, thank you. Let's move from a metaphorical rock and a hard place to a real one on the Strait of Hormuz, where 11,000 crew remain stuck on ships in the middle of two warring belligerents now negotiating peace, telling them opposing advice onto how safely to evacuate. The Iranian regime is telling them to leave, but first to cross via one of the islands, Larak Island, at the northern part of the strait. And the US and the International Maritime Organization, meanwhile, is saying the route to take is to keep to the coastline of Oman and take what they call the Guardian Angel route that hugs the coast of Oman up until the Al Jabal point here. So the north is what the Iranians are saying, the south is what the US is saying. And the route normally taken in the middle here is likely full of mines. Add to that, the Iranians are saying to the ship crew, you cannot guarantee your safety if you go the American route, while the Americans are saying if you take the Iranian route, your insurance cannot be covered and you're likely breaking sanctions. Despite this traffic, it's slowly increasing. 70 vessels left on Wednesday. A few dozen have actually gone into the strait this week, suggesting some increased confidence. There has been a drone issue, a shooting of one vessel by the Iranians, which has also flared off this week. And add to it, Secretary of State Marco Rubio talked tolls. He headed to the Middle East for a diplomatic tour of the Gulf on Wednesday, Qatar, and making it plain, call it what you want, but the US will not allow Iran to charge a toll on the strait.
When we mean open the straits, we mean open the straits free in international waterways. I know of no country on the planet that supports tolling or a fee for the use of the straits. That's not going to happen. The president has been abundantly clear.
Other issues being negotiated were the inspection of Iran's nuclear energy sites. Again, different sides giving different stories. Trump claimed inspectors from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, would be going in by the end of this week. Tehran said no agreement yet. And the head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, who wants to be the next UN chief, said of course they'll go in, but they don't know when or where are the circumstances yet. Two things changed, however. A comparative small portion of the Iranian regime's frozen assets were made available. $6 billion of around $100 billion that were frozen have been released by Qatar. And the Americans say it's for humanitarian purposes. The Iranians sounded a bit like Nigel Farage, saying they can spend it on whatever they want. Yegane, your headline this week sums it up, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that this memorandum, although it was reached and both sides signed it, we're seeing that both sides have fundamentally different interpretations of exactly how to actually implement it and what it means. And also that the tenets of the memorandum, the language of it, is vague enough that both sides can kind of point to their interpretation as the correct one. Now, all of these disagreements are supposed to be hashed out kind of in more specific manner when the two sides reach a final deal. But that, is at least, 60 days or a little less than 60 days away, and potentially quite a lot longer, because these nuclear deals take quite a long time to reach. And so, we're really in a phase now where both sides want to portray that they've won quite a bit, but it's very unclear, at least what you kind of see from the actual agreement. I think what I've written about over the past couple of weeks and what analysts have told me is that Iran sort of got a lot of the benefits up front. The toughest concessions that Iran would have to make have been delayed until the final agreement is actually signed. And then both sides in the meantime have very differing interpretations of even the things that Iran has been asked to do and how those negotiations are going.
Take us into the room this week a bit more, if you can, Yeganeh, because you'd have seen different things to us. We're watching perhaps the Americans a bit more. You've been looking at those Iranian figures in the hotel in Switzerland. Tell me about the leverage going on, the power dynamics you're seeing.
I think from the Iranian side, they very much, if you look at their rhetoric domestically in public, which I think is really worth paying a lot of attention to, they believe that they have won this war. Now, militarily, yes, they might have been decimated and have faced a lot of losses also to their infrastructure. But from their perspective, they're still standing. The Islamic Republic is still around, and the U.S. did not achieve its goals of either regime change or completely destroying the country's military or ability to respond militarily. And so they feel they have won. From across the factions, this has been quite notable to me. It used to be that you would hear talk about the Strait of Hormuz and controlling the strait, mostly from the Revolutionary Guards. And every once in a while, some Guards general would say, we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz during moments of tension with the United States. I'm talking about maybe a decade ago or so when I was covering Iran back then. Now you hear it really from everyone, from various factions, from the elected reformist government on down to the Guards, which are more hardline. They believe that they have the strait now and that it will be managed in the future by Iran. It's a pretty universal sentiment. And so they're going into these talks feeling like they have the leverage and the upper hand. They've shown that they can really affect the world economy. President Trump basically admitted as such. He said that he didn't want to be Herbert Hoover, and that was one of his motivations for signing the deal. So, Vice President Vance has said several times in the last week or so that the U.S. has the leverage. When they're going into these talks, the U.S. feels like they have the upper hand. But that is certainly not how the Iranians see it. And I think if you also read the memorandum of understanding that they reached, given what the Iranians were able to achieve, that leverage that Vice President Vance is speaking of doesn't really appear, at least in that memorandum.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long. I've heard diplomats say it's got more holes than Swiss cheese. To that point, Yeganeh, as well, I'm struck by something else. I think you've touched upon this before. There are two parallels going on at these talks: President Trump and Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, which is this. President Trump appeared to joke, didn't he, last week, that if negotiations go wrong, he can blame J.D. Vance. Now, at the same time, the Ayatollah seems to have stated he's kind of been reluctant about this whole deal, that Trump is desperate, he said, or he's purported to have said, we haven't seen or heard him, but he's allowed them to go ahead because of the kind of advice of the president, Pezeshkian. So basically, there's a fall guy dynamic going on, isn't there?
That's very insightful, yes. So, this is kind of a long-standing trend amongst supreme leaders in Iran. The master of this was Ayatollah Khamenei's father, the second supreme leader of the country. And he had a series of elected presidents who served underneath him, who were popularly elected, but under Iran's system had less power than he did. But he often shifted accountability onto them so that he could avoid accountability. So, he may have his own perspective or his view or even influence decision-making or make decisions in a certain way. But when those things went wrong, he would dodge accountability and kind of push it onto the elected organs of government. And we see that the supreme leader now, his son, has learned from that. And he basically did that in this statement. He basically said, I disagreed with signing this in principle, but the president has assured me that, our diplomats are going to defend Iran's rights in the negotiating room. And so I allowed it to go ahead. So then if it goes badly, it goes sideways, a war relaunches, whatever it might be, he can say, well, it was President Pezeshkian who pushed me into this, rather than kind of taking accountability as the commander in chief and as the most powerful man in Iran.
To that point, Tom, just listening about Khamenei and the parallels, there's also just a quick word on the Strait of Hormuz. That I mentioned the rock and a hard place before, because you've got the so-called American guardian angel route or the Iranian route. So the big question is now is basically for the ship's crew, who do you trust the most?
Yeah, difficult. And what we've seen play out in the Strait of the last 48 hours has been absolutely fascinating, because I think Yeganeh is absolutely spot on. Right there is that tussle that Iran is absolutely determined to enforce from the very start of this, which is over who should have sovereignty over the strait. Previously, it was international waters. No one had sovereignty over it. And that is actually still what maritime international law dictates. But Iran has been extremely clear to say, well, actually, we are going to control this. If you read the memorandum of understanding, which Yeganeh would have done as well, like me, every sort of point of it, it's crystal clear in there. All Iran agrees to is to open the strait for 60 days without any checks or stops and free to traffic. After those 60 days, the memorandum clearly states that Iran is going to talk to Oman, which is the other side of the strait, on the southern side of it, to discuss what it talks of administration principles going further forward. In other words, we're going to carve this up between the two of us. And what you see there is Iran already saying to ships, you need to come to through our lane, not through the south, because this is where the strait is going to be. We're going to own it forevermore. And if you don't, we're going to throw some drones at you. So, it's hardball with softball, and they're quite frankly, they're backed up by this MOU that gives them full right almost to this. Not yet, but in, where are we now, 60 days, sort of 57 days time. So the US has signed up to something that is going to be, I think, incredibly hard for them to negotiate a decent outcome, certainly to keep the strait open, which I think all of this will all be about, and it ain't going to stop here, sadly.
No. Meanwhile, there's a British mine clearance ship heading out there to the HMS Lime Bay. Doug, to bring you in to Tom's point, it's also worth saying the Trump administration this week is asking for $87 billion. This is to be cleared by Congress. Much of it's replenished defence, Pentagon stocks, depleted weapon stocks, around 60-something billion. And the request coming hours after Trump engaged into a shouting match in Congress, basically on the vote to rein in his powers on continuing the war.
Yeah, lest you had any doubts about the euphemism everyone uses, rifts between Donald Trump and the Republican leaders, rifts within the MAGA movement. This luncheon, such a pleasant term, this luncheon laid bare just how much tension, if not downright animus, there is between Trump and still just a handful, let's be honest, of Republicans who dare to say, a no to him, who dare to stand up to him and speak back, because Trump still does not take no for an answer, by definition. At this lunch, you're absolutely right. There was a shouting match. I mean, it was actually meant to just be a lunch at which maybe they were expecting a signing ceremony shortly afterwards, for a big housing bill. A housing bill which was the object of a rare bipartisan consensus. Both Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate had miraculously come together on an issue and agreed that this is important, that Americans can afford rents and housing, and that there's more construction, an issue in an affordability crisis that everyone could seemingly agree on. And Trump sort of torpedoed that by abruptly announcing he's not going to sign that housing bill. This was going into the lunch, Gavin. He wasn't going to sign it because he was basically holding that hostage to the Republicans' approving the so-called Save America Act, which is an act which would tighten voting procedures, which is sort of a euphemism for disenfranchise millions of eligible Americans from voting by requiring much tougher proof of citizenship and ID when they go to vote. All of this now fell hostage. The breakdown was actually, it ended up being a shouting match, as you said, over the Iran vote, which was about the war powers.
Yes.
But there were all these issues looming in the backdrop and a lot of tension.
Yegane, I want to give the last word on this to you and the book, The Stolen Revolution. You're following several different accounts over the decades to get to this point. And the situation people are in now, we've got annual inflation around 80%. There was already an economic crisis which brought people out onto the streets. And there's a very interesting point I'm struck by. To those that say the Ayatollah, the new one we haven't seen or heard, that he doesn't know what's going on, is it true that his counter to this has been, or those around him, it's a bit like Shakespeare's Henry V, he's disguised himself amongst the people in case Khamenei, in this case, is saying he worked in the past as a taxi driver, he drove around Tehran to get to know what people really think. Is that why he's in touch?
That's why what he has said in one of his statements that, I went amongst you, the people, to kind of understand your concerns. In many cases, I agreed with your concerns, and he has sort of promised some sort of economic reform. I think one thing I would add is that, Vice President Vance has, in a lot of his rhetoric over the last couple of weeks, sort of expressed this hope and almost like a gamble on the idea that the Iranian government would decide that it's going to turn its back on 47 years of its ideology and policies towards the United States. He said in an interview with the New York Times opinion section that, they see this sort of coalescing amongst both the hardliners and the pragmatists, that it's time to kind of set aside this anti-American ideology and really focus on the economy. What I found in the book research is that there's really not much precedent for that. The Iranian government, as it stands today, those ideological pillars are quite important to it, and it finds the idea of really opening up the economy to be quite a threat. And so it would be a real break in tradition for that to happen now, even though it would probably resolve a lot of the problems that Ayatollah Khamenei identified in that letter.
Yegane, thank you. Fantastic to hear your insight tonight, and a fantastic panel as well. Yegane Torbati, Iran correspondent for the New York Times and co-author of Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. Thank you, Yegane. Have a great weekend.
Thank you also so much. You too.
Thank you to Tom Newton-Dunn, writer, broadcaster, political commentator for The Times and co-presenter of a terrific podcast, The General, and The Journalist. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Gavin. Stay cool.
And in the studio with me, Doug Herbert, France 24's international affairs commentator. Same to you, Doug. Stay cool this weekend. I will leave you with some footage, not from the football pitch at the World Cup this week, but from the fans representing. Last week we showed you Japanese fans staying back in the stadium after the match to litter pick. This week, from Americans talking of new energy in Boston with a tartan takeover. The fans that have once again stolen the show, painting the town orange, are the Dutch with their anthem Links Recht, Left Right. Does exactly what it says on the tin. Enjoy, resist the urge to jump along if you can, and stay cool in the canicle. We'll see you in 7 days for the world next week.
This week, Paris des Arts turns its cameras on the Moroccan imperial city of Fez for the Festival of World Sacred Music, a celebration of dialogue between cultures and spiritualities. Singer Nabila Maan shares her passion for traditional Moroccan music and its Arab Andalusian rhythms.
J'ai cette musique qui circule dans mes veines, j'ai ça dans mon ADN. Il y a quelque chose qui se passe au fond de moi quand j'interprète cette musique, c'est mystique.
We also meet pianist Rami Khalife, a member of the Antidote Trio. 3 stories, 3 cultures, 1 shared language, music.
La musique, pour moi, c'est un acte politique déjà, c'est un acte de résistance, de pouvoir aller sur scène, d'être soi-même.
And finally, one of the great pleasures of Fez, getting lost in the Medina, a city within a city. Don't miss Paris des Arts from Fez, Morocco, on France 24.